Part 1. The Beginnings. In 1830, settlers were expanding in northern Massachusetts. One of them was Daniel Peters, and he bought strips of land on the surrounding sides of the Merrimack River, which would actually soon turn into Lowell. Now another man named Abbott Lawrence, pictured here, bought the old land that Daniel Peters had originally purchased, and with his group of investors, constructed the world's first organized industrial city. This would turn into Lowell. Now before you go thinking, well, what about Boston, or what about New York? Those turned into industrial cities after the fact that they had been created as colonial towns. Lowell was planned to be one by Abbott Lawrence, and this is why it started becoming so popular. Abbott Lawrence saw the Merrimack River as a source of potential energy. He would eventually turn this into a way to power all the factories and mills that Lowell would come to. Years after, Lowell grew, and eventually it was known as one of the biggest cities in all of Massachusetts. Years passed, and factories and mills started sprouting up left and right, and the only source that they had to power it was the Merrimack River. Part 2. The Great Strike of 1912. By the 1900s, Lowell had so many mills and so many factories that skilled workers weren't needed anymore. Thus began the employment of immigrant workers, who would work at a much lower wage and in much worse working conditions. A lot of these immigrant workers died as a result of being untrained. To make matters worse, a new law was passed reducing the maximum number of hours a worker could work. And just as things were seeing out of hope for the immigrant workers, help came. Just as things were seeming hopeless, the workers decided to go on strike. Within a week, 20,000 workers stood by the original strikers. Sadly, as time passed and panic rose, the workers and mill owners both began getting more and more violent. The mill owners and workers started going back and forth, with the mill owners fencing the workers in and pointing fire hoses at them. Soon enough, the workers got irritated and decided that it would be a good idea to throw ice and rocks at the factories and the mill owners, breaking windows and causing serious damage. Soon, the judicial system started taking note of this, and soon the courts would sentence 36 workers to a year in jail for the violent acts. This soon led into mass arrests being made. The authorities even arrested two men, one named Eder, one Giovanni, for the murder of Anna Lopeza, one of the strikers, who was actually most likely shot at by the police. Aid soon came from the United Textile Workers and the industrial workers of the world. They responded by sending Bill Haywood and Elizabeth Gurley Flynn, among a number of other organizers, to Lowell. The fight rained on, but eventually the IWW was the victor. In the end, they raised $60,000 for the defense, and they held mass meetings throughout the U.S. for the rights of workers all along the country. Everything was looking great, until suddenly the strikers lost nearly all of the money they had won in the past months because of the Depression. Slowly, some of the wages and working conditions were chiseled at, but it was always better than before. Win or lose, this was a huge win for women's rights and workers' rights and human rights all around. This was a great moment for U.S. history. Present-day Lowell is now a beautiful city surrounded by the Merrimack. Some consider it one of the most beautiful cities in Massachusetts. UMass Lowell is one of the state universities housed at Lowell, and it is considered to have one of the most beautiful campus cities in all of Massachusetts.